Ready to start, restart, or re-energize your vegan or plant-based practice? My name's Michelle Olander. I'm a life coach, and after years of being an excusitarian, I committed to going vegan in 2015 when I was 56. I think there has never been a more important time to move in a vegan direction. So I'm here every week to cheer you on and ask you to veg your best. Episode 193, Plant Magic and Gut Health, with registered dietitian Desiree Nielsen. Welcome back, kids. Welcome back. It's been a big week. A lot happened. It started with me driving the car from Florida to Rhode Island. And if you ever want to discuss different routes, I've got some points of view on the matter. And yes, I did have a little more trouble than usual eating plant-based. So I mostly ate out of supermarket snacks, fruits, nuts, dates, granola, ramen. When you're just sitting and driving, I don't know. Is it just me? I'm not doing that much, and I wasn't super hungry. But a few of the places I stopped, it was very disappointing. A few places I stopped, they'd run out of the veggie burgers. One place was so filthy, I left. Honestly, I think it made it a little easier not to eat that much the rest of the trip. That was it. At a chain that I usually really like, and I'm not going to slander it here, but I was so glad that, what happened was I was so glad that the place I stopped for the night was right next to this chain. It was kind of a selling point for where I stopped that night. And when I went in to this chain, it was so dirty that I probably will never, ever be able to go into that business again. Even though that's not fair, I think these places are all franchised and have different operators and different managers, but that is the level of my trauma. So anyway, that made it easier, I think, not to eat so much on the trip. But anyway, when I'm doing that drive, it's not one of my check out America trips. I'm not investigating the little towns and cute places along the way. Typically, I'm by myself and I'm just trying to cover the miles to get home. So I did listen to podcasts, one of my favorite forms of new media, and I listened to Audible books, and I always want to say books on tape, but I don't even know if anyone understands what that means anymore. But if you haven't watched the TV show, it's on Apple TV, the TV show Slow Horses, the Audible versions of that series of books by Mick Herron are super. They're super. The narrator, the reader, fabulous. His name is Gerard. I can't remember, but he's great. Highly, highly recommend. And if you haven't listened to the podcast, Joanna and the Maestro, that is also super. I can't remember if I've shared this on the pod here before. And maybe someday I'm going to do one of my favorites, an episode of all my favorites. But Joanna Lumley, that's the Joanna in Joanna and the Maestro. Joanna Lumley is a veteran British actress and a travel presenter, and she's one of my favorites, famous for playing the character Patsy in Absolutely Fabulous. And she's married to a composer. Okay, I just looked at my notes, and Charlie, you can keep this in. I just about said composter because that's what my notes say, that he's a composter. Okay, her husband, Stephen Barlow, is a composer. I'm sure that I write the word composter 100 times more often than I ever write the word composer. Anyway, Joanna is married to a composer, organist, conductor, and so she asks him on the podcast little things about music history, about backstage in classical musical performances, about opera, about his likes and dislikes, about certain things. It's super, really. Even if you, which I do not have a very strong music background. I'm an art historian by training, but my music history, my music knowledge, pretty slim. I know what I like. But this is a great, great podcast. And so I caught up a lot with Joanna and the Maestro. And luckily, I had a lot to think about because food did not take up a big chunk of my energy this trip. It was mostly water, coffee, and things most of us would call snacks and cereals. So anyway, enough of that. That's just catching you up on my week. I arrived late Thursday in Rhode Island, and then Friday morning, I had the opportunity to speak to this week's guest. And she's super. She's Canadian, which is always a good sign. Desiree Nielsen, based in Vancouver, is a registered dietitian. And Desiree is the host of the Allsorts Podcast and author of the best-selling plant-based book, Eat More Plants, and now the author of a brand new book called Plant Magic. Plant Magic. Now, Desiree's focus in her professional work is evidence-based advice on gut health and plant-based nutrition and delicious plant-based recipes that are also good for your gut. Now, when I talk to folks about my work or I mention eating plant-based, one of the reasons people often give for not being able to transition towards a plant-based diet is they think they can't tolerate the level of fiber in a plant-rich diet. A diet full of beans and greens and whole grains and fruits. So gut health is one of Desiree Nielsen's areas of focus, and I really wanted to have her professional thoughts in this conversation this week. And so remember, Desiree doesn't know you. She hasn't met you. She hasn't read your medical file. So please, I know we have to say this. This is a conversation for entertainment purposes and to help you take on some ideas, maybe encourage you to discuss these topics with your primary care provider or health professional. Our guts are as individual as we are, but in most cases, they are capable of change through our lifestyles and the foods we ingest. So enough of my caveats and preambles. You know, this is not medical advice, but let's hear from Desiree. Desiree Nielsen, registered dietitian and author of the new book, Plant Magic. Welcome to Veg Your Best.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I'm so excited to talk to you.
Well, I'm excited that you responded to my request to get to chat with you because you are a podcaster. As I just said, you're a registered dietitian, and you've got this brand new book out, number 3, as I understand it, Plant Magic. 3. And I just want to know everything.
Well, I am an open book, so I'm here to tell you everything.
Well, first of all, so Plant Magic is a plant-based, mostly cookbook, correct?
Mm-hmm. It's a 100% plant-based book, so no animal products whatsoever.
Okay, so tell me about what brought you to working in plant-based, no animal product cooking and food.
Yeah. So I had been an ovo-lacto, so like eggs and dairy vegetarian since I was a teenager. And so I'd been off meat for a long, long time before I became a dietitian. And the more that I learned about the nature of animal agriculture, it got to the point where in my 30s, I was like, I've got to make a different choice. And it was time for me to go fully plant-based. And it was really at about that time where I started getting more heavily into recipe development as well. And I think part of that was personally motivated because I was one of those vegetarians who said, oh, I could be vegan except for the cheese, like that old yarn. Classic. And so really embracing plant-based cooking with a sense of curiosity and adventure is really what allowed me to open up to fully plant-based eating because I could find ways of recreating all the flavors and the textures that I craved. Because as much as we all want to live our life in accordance with our highest, best ideals and best selves, we also want to enjoy our lives and, relish in the pleasures that this world has to offer. And so, I needed to figure out cream. I needed to figure out cream. I needed to figure out cheese. And I did that. But at the same time, I also had this incredible opportunity come my way, which was I was contacted on Twitter and asked to audition for a vegetarian cooking show, which, on a lark, I was like, there is no way, no how anyone's going to give this lady a TV show. I'm a self-taught cook. I have no knife skills to speak of, no background in really writing recipes. And lo and behold, I got the show. So that really thrust me into this world of cooking, and from that opportunity and the creativity of it too, because I am a super nerd. I got into nutrition and health because I am so nerdy for the science of how food and nutrients impact our physiology and our sense of well-being. But this really cracked me open to the creativity and the joy of creating new things in food. And because of that, I was able to write my first cookbook, which was Eat More Plants, which came out in 2019. And I loved it so much that I was like, this is a whole new world for me. So and here I am with Plant Magic 5 years later.
And what was in between? Eat More Plants was the first.
And then Good for Your Gut.
Good for Your Gut.
And then Plant Magic. And it was really Eat More Plants and Good for Your Gut are different from Plant Magic because they're what I call therapeutic nutrition cookbooks. As a dietitian, I have two core clinical areas of expertise. The first is chronic inflammatory diseases such as fibromyalgia, for example. And then the second is chronic digestive diseases. And I know gut health is such a trend right now, but I cut my eye teeth on things like celiac disease and Crohn's disease. And so really chronic, highly clinical digestive health. And so I wanted to be able to share all of the knowledge I had in those two areas in these books. So there's 100 pages of education up front, and then the recipes, because when I started my nutrition career, like I said, I was like a super nerd, and food didn't even really occur to me as much as I loved food personally. But what I learned very early on in practice was that we can give people so much information. We can talk about fiber and soluble fiber versus insoluble fiber. We can talk about how phytochemicals impact inflammation. But at the end of the day, my client would have to take that information home and figure out what to make for dinner on a Tuesday. And recipes became this bridge between the knowledge we need to really understand what's happening in our body and living a lifestyle that allowed you to put that knowledge into practice. And so that's where Eat More Plants and Good for Your Gut really sit. And then once I was done those two books, I was like, yeah, but what about the rest of us? What about the person who's like, oh, well, I'm not worried about inflammation, or I'm not that into my gut. Where are my recipes? And that's where Plant Magic lives. It's this book for everyone, for the plant curious who are just like, oh, I'd like to eat more plants, but I'm worried it won't be delicious. Or I'm worried that there'll be ingredients I don't know how to use. Or the longtime vegan who's maybe just in a bit of a food rut, or maybe ready to find some new favorites.
And it's such a great title. I love it.
Thank you. Plants are magic, and it actually came to me during one of the photo shoots for Good for Your Gut. Because I was hanging out with the team and we were talking about, what are you going to do next? And I was like, I have this idea. And I was like, I want it to be different. And I want people to just really embrace the magic. And I was like, oh, plant magic. Instantly it came to me like that.
Note to self.
No, yeah, exactly. Let me put that in my smartphone just for later.
And it almost to me, I hope it doesn't stoke fear in anybody who's listening, but it almost reminds me of the concept of the wise woman, of the
Mm.
of the of the kind of ancient knowledge that women used to help and cure and take care of each other and their children and the midwives. It's the idea of plant magic, it just being so important to us historically.
Absolutely. And there are so many traditional lineages where the world of plants was looked to as medicine. And, I think there is a bit of that thread winding through plant magic in a really, really understated way. There's a lot of use of herbs and spices, but also, things that are more traditionally thought of as sort of like herbal medicine. For example, hibiscus. There's like a whole everyday tonics chapter sort of hidden in the back of that book because traditional herbal medicines have always really fascinated me and I have a deep respect for them. So there is that part of the book. And then the other thing that really runs through the book, and I think is really the core focus, is embracing the joy and the flavor and the pleasure of eating more plants. Because so often in wellness or in nutrition, information or rhetoric or just, all the stuff that we are exposed to online, the overwhelming theme is one of deprivation or scaring people into a certain way of eating because only I know what's best for you, and then buy my supplement powder, $79.99. And so I really want to remind people that taking care of ourselves and eating well is meant to be joyful. It's not joy in spite of our health, it is joy as an essential ingredient in our health.
I think that's marvelous. I always think that when people say wellness, just to me, it seems to have a price tag always attached to it. It's somebody's trying to sell me something when they say wellness, even though it should be just health and a kind of a calm, happy, natural thing that we could all achieve by more simple choices. And obviously, plants are one of those simple choices.
Yeah, I think there's two things really driving that. One, in our North American culture, like the origins of our sort of like European settler culture, is this sort of like rigidity and piety, right? That if we eat a certain way or behave in a certain way, we're somehow better. And we've transferred this into wellness, but then also just our very capitalistic nature, right? Like it's it's easy to market a really glossy product. And make no mistake, I love fancy packaging and I love fun things as much as the next person. But when we hinge our hopes and our desires for better health on these things, then it's very, very misplaced. It should and is simple, and we overcomplicate it. The whole apple a day keeps the doctor away kind of thing. Like we have these sort of, if we close our eyes, we get the idea that eating simply, eating fruits, eating vegetables, eating simple meals prepared at home is actually the path. But we allow all of this messaging to clutter our beliefs and really the path itself.
I think I mentioned just before we started recording that a lot of the people who listen to this podcast are women of a certain age or even older. And two of the things I hear often that they struggle with are, well, the first one, protein. They are very, very concerned about protein. I know it's kind of a joke in the vegan and plant-based community. We're like, where do you get your protein? People are sick of answering it. But I think it bears talking about that we can get enough protein to build muscles and to stay erect and our bones, to be strong. How are we getting our protein in plant magic?
Yeah. And I think it's really important in the sort of perimenopause and menopause community is that there is a huge emphasis placed on protein and a misguided connection between animal foods being protein. We forget that protein is not a food. Protein is a nutrient found in foods and absolutely throughout the plant-based, world. So protein is important for bone density, for maintaining muscle mass, along with things like strength training. And as we get older and perhaps our appetites wane a little bit, or we become more sedentary, therefore we need less energy to fuel our bodies, proportionally, protein becomes a bit more important. But that doesn't mean we need to eat 3 chicken breasts at dinner. I think like that's the connection that we immediately jump to, which is incorrect. So in the plant world, we have things like tofu, a half a cup of extra firm tofu, which is a really small amount. I eat much more than that. That's 10 grams of protein right there. The same half cup of tempeh, which is a fermented soybean product, a little like tofu, but it's whole soybeans and fermented, that has 16 grams of protein. Just 3 tablespoons of hemp hearts, which are mineral rich and filled with omega-3 fatty acids. 3 tablespoons of hemp hearts contain 10 grams of protein. So there are plenty of very protein-rich foods on offer when we are focusing more on protein in our overall diet.
So that's very good to remind people with, even if you don't feel comfortable changing completely today, it's something to start incorporating, maybe create a taste for some of these different kinds of plant-based proteins that you're actually already eating. If you're eating any kind of plants, you're getting some protein from all those plants right now.
Yeah. And I think what's so interesting about the new curiosity and sort of the trend of vegan and plant-based eating is that, people are talking more about it. People are more curious about these foods, yet at the same time, it creates this sort of barrier of like, oh, so plant meals or vegan meals must be a thing. Whereas if you ate oatmeal this morning with some berries, that was a plant-based meal. Like we are overthinking it just a little bit. And also this idea that people who, still eat an omnivorous, eat all of the things kind of diet, they have the idea that vegan meals are only for vegan people, which couldn't be further from the truth. So you can, and, it is encouraged in Canada, our national guidelines are that all eaters consume more plant-based proteins. So that means for the omnivore, maybe on Friday night, they are having a small piece of steak because that's their thing. And then on Saturday, they're having a beautiful chickpea curry with vegetables. It is all of those things together, not one or the other.
So that's even with the federal guidelines of the country. Yeah.
Yeah. Like in Canada, our federal guidelines are that healthy eaters, and that means all eaters, people who eat all the things, consume far more plant-based proteins than animal ones.
So that should be of some, it should be of some comfort to people who are thinking, I don't know if I'm going to get enough protein. I have often said on the podcast that before I went vegan, one of my daughters was a student athlete and was wanted to be vegan, and I started like researching and thinking and listening to podcasts many times about ultra athletes who were fueling themselves, and I was thinking, okay, if they can do it, we can do it. And so it was something that took me a while. There's just the reinforcement of, do you want any protein on that salad that they say in restaurants all the time? It reminds us so often this idea that no, you need to have an animal lying on your salad for it to be protein.
Yeah. I have so much to unpack there. The idea that we call these animal foods protein as opposed to what they are, which are animals, is one thing. But yes, we have made the word protein synonymous with meat and dairy, which couldn't be further from the truth. And I think the other thing to remember when you are concerned about meeting your protein needs is that your body has no idea where the nutrients in its bloodstream came from. So there is this sort of idea that somehow, protein from chicken or fish or meat is somehow, quote unquote, better than plant-based protein. But our stomachs and our digestive systems break all of those proteins down into their base components, which are called amino acids. Amino acids are the building blocks, like the little Lego pieces in your Lego castle. When those amino acids hit your bloodstream, there's no tag on them. It's like, this is not a chicken, lysine versus a hemp heart lysine. All your body knows is that it got the amino acids it needs to build and repair your cellular structures. And so the only thing that matters is that we consume enough food. That's really critical, particularly, for those of us who have grown up always aware and monitoring their intake for their body size, because of course, society tells us that we're only good in the smallest body size possible. So under eating is a common source of protein malnutrition. So, when people aren't getting enough protein, I am looking, I was like, are you eating enough in general? And the other thing to know with protein is that for those of us who have the privilege of having enough food in our fridges, protein deficiency is exceedingly rare. Whereas the nutrient that very, very few of us in North America are consuming enough of is fiber. And when we talk about our digestive health, and there's a huge issue with our collective guts, all is not well in our shires in North America. But then also chronic inflammation, even cardiometabolic health, which as we get older, we don't talk enough about heart disease in women. All of those things have links to a healthy gut microbiome, which is very strongly linked to the amount of plants that we're eating, as well as our overall fiber intake.
Well, now you've come to the second thing that people say to me all the time is, Michelle, sure, I could, except I can't tolerate the fiber. I can't tolerate the beans. Some people have full-fledged inflammatory issues in the gut. Other people are just sensitive and maybe walking on the borderline of it. I know this is your specialty in many ways, but you don't know any of my listeners. You have not examined them. You don't have their medical files. So everybody just listen. And perhaps it's a question for your primary care provider or for a registered dietitian who knows you better. But I would like to talk about it with you because it is one of your specialties.
Yeah. And I will reiterate that for any one person, nutrition is meant to be individualized. And so whenever we're giving blanket information, like it's likely not going to 100% or maybe even 5% apply to you. But one of the things that I see, and I have worked with people, particularly because I have a background working with people with the inflammatory bowel diseases, things like Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. These clients will come into our practice with upwards of a dozen bowel movements a day. And those are the people who say, I can't eat a salad. Like it comes out exactly as it went in. And so I would never in a million years say, what the answer is? Immediately you are going to eat 10 pounds of raw leafy vegetables. No, we have to work with where we're at right now. But for the general population, I will say two things. The first is, in our practice, what we see as the number one cause of food intolerance type reactions is constipation. Constipation affects so many of us. And one of the biggest challenges is in defining what constipation is. Most gastroenterologists, when you ask them, like, how often should we poop? What is normal? They will quote a single study that showed that, quote unquote, normal bowel habits are anywhere from 3 times a day to 3 times a week. So they're like, as long as you're in that, you're normal. The challenge with that, not only because it was a relatively small population, but it looked at folks who were just eating a typical diet. So they were saying, like, what's a population without celiac disease, without IBS, without Crohn's disease, like, and how often do they poop? And let's just call that normal. And so there's what is common versus what is optimal. Because like our body is designed to digest, absorb, and then remove wastes from the system. So I would say you should be moving your bowels daily. Like that is optimal / physiologically normal. And there's normal variation. Like we get on a plane and it sort of messes with our habits for a couple of days, totally normal. But like generally we're going every day. And if you are not, that means that there is a lot of stool in the digestive tract. It is literally halting the normal flow of things like gases. And that means when we put more food into the body, particularly fibrous food, AKA plants, you are causing more gas, more bloating, which can lead to all sorts of things like feeling lethargic, for example. And you're like, oh, well, this is like a food intolerance. Therefore, I just don't tolerate these plant foods, when the underlying issue could be constipation. So that's an important, if this is triggering some sort of like light bulb moment for folks, to talk to their doc and be like, oh, am I constipated? It's a good thing to check out. The other thing that I find is that we take the experience of food intolerance type reactions as a sign that a specific food doesn't work for us, as opposed to looking at it as a potential sign that the gut just isn't doing well. And a really easy way to sort of internalize this, because we get so much messaging around food intolerance and food sensitivity, is take the person who, just hasn't worked out in 5 years. They've got young kids, they've been working 50 hours a week. They're just at wit's end. They have not been able to take the time to move their body. So when they maybe go on a little hike with some girlfriends and they're like laid up for 3 days afterwards because they moved their muscles for the first time in a while, they don't go, ooh, hiking is bad for me, I should never hike again. They realize it's been a tough 5 years. My body is not fit and strong enough to handle what I just tried to do. The same is true with our guts. So if we eat a standard North American diet, which is typically a lot of hyper-processed foods, very low in fiber, and we have the stats to back it up, like we are chronically underfibered in North America. And then we eat a hearty, like black bean chili and feel destroyed for the rest of the evening. We go, oh, I'm intolerant to beans. No. Your gut is not strong enough to handle the plant foods. And so we do something in our practice with even our most, inflammatory, like sort of gut issues like chronic Crohn's or ulcerative colitis. We do something called fiber training. And the idea is that you have to build up the gut muscle slowly and consistently, the same way you would the rest of your muscles, so that it can handle plant-based foods. And that means for someone who doesn't eat a lot of fiber, we might just be doing a little bit of oatmeal. Oatmeal is a beautiful, gentle fiber. It's low FODMAP, which means that it doesn't typically lend itself to a lot of fermentation, AKA gas. So we start with these very soft, highly tolerated fibers in small amounts. And then it's consistency. Like consistency is really the secret sauce when it comes to nutrition. It's not these fancy, very Instagrammable moves. It is the showing up every day. I'm like, I'm an oatmeal person now. Like, this is what we're going to do. And when that starts feeling really good, like, let's try legumes again. Like maybe we're going to do just a touch. It's like a 1/4 cup of chickpeas a day. And I'm going to throw it on whatever I'm eating for lunch. I'll throw it on my salad, my grain bowl, my soup, a really, really small amount. Again, it's just like increasing the weight from 5 pounds to 7 pounds. And we just do that until our digestive tract becomes robust enough to handle that sort of like full on whole foods, plant-based life.
So what makes it robust enough? Is this a case of these fibrous foods being prebiotics? So they are something to help nurture the gut flora that we don't have in large numbers?
Yeah. So it's incredibly complex, which is why I find it so fascinating. But that is one piece of it. Mm-hmm. So our microbiome is highly adaptable. So that your diet sort of self-selects the kind of gut bugs that are going to call you home, like, because they're getting your remnants. Like, you are essentially feeding them all your cast-offs, your leftovers are what feed your gut microbiome. And so if you're typically eating lots of animal proteins, lots of fats, not a lot of fiber, they're getting mostly the minimal amounts of fats and proteins and a little bit of, because everybody eats some fiber, a little bit of that cast off. And that's the kind of bacteria that are happy there. That's a very different kind of bacteria than are happy when you eat a ton of fiber. Therefore, your leftovers are mostly plant fibers. And so what you need to do is like slowly encourage the growth of different bacteria, which are going to help you digest better. But then there's also because your digestive tract is highly innervated. So there's like a really complex nervous system in your gut that dictates how the gut moves. We call that motility. It's like the motion of your gut, which, we don't have conscious control over until the very end, of course. And so when you are chronically constipated or have slow motility because of a low fiber diet, we also need to get the gut moving a lot faster. And one of the things that helps is fiber, but it's that double-edged sword. You want just a little to help hydrate the gut contents, to add weight and bulk, which helps the gut sense that it needs to move along a little bit faster without being so much that it overwhelms a sluggish gut. So there is that actual motility piece as well.
Now, so many people I know are spending a lot of money on probiotics at the drugstore, at the pharmacy, in an attempt to somehow do an end run around all these issues. Is that money well spent in general, in your opinion?
It is often wasted, but in some instances, it is money well spent. We have to sort of combat one, that we have a huge probiotic industry that puts out a lot of junk. Like, there is a lot of junk on store shelves that we are literally wasting, throwing our money away on. There are some probiotics that are exceptional. They are not the famous name brands, generally speaking, because they're these very nerdy scientific companies that only do one thing, which is make their probiotic. A great way to find those is a website called Probiotic Guide. It's just usprobioticguide.com. And in Canada, it's probioticchart.ca. This is run by a clinical board. It's a third-party thing. Their entire reason for being is to help clinicians make better evidence-based choices. And so you can go and you're like, oh, I take probiotic X. I've been taking it for, 6 months. You can go on usprobioticguide.com and look up if probiotic X is there. If it's not there, it means there is no research to back it up. And if it is there, it will tell you what the research is for. So maybe you've been taking probiotic X for IBS, and there's no research for it in IBS, but there is research for it in constipation. So you can see not only does your probiotic have research, but then what's the research for? Because one of the things we don't understand with probiotics is we think of them as one thing. We think of probiotics as vitamin D, which is always the same, but that's not correct. Probiotics are all individual organisms or combinations of organisms, so they work in a different way. So saying probiotics is more like saying supplements. There are all kinds of supplements. There's vitamin D, there's omega-3s, there's echinacea. Those are all totally different things. And so it's the same with probiotics. So you need to make sure your specific probiotic works for the thing you want it to. And then you have well, is a probiotic really going to move the needle? There's all sorts of claims being made by probiotics that it'll essentially, like do everything and do your laundry for you. But you have to remember what we eat determines what kind of bacteria thrive in our gut. So a probiotic can be super helpful. Like for my folks with IBS and sometimes with Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, it can help just sort of like speed up that transformation in the gut microbiome that we're looking for. Particularly, I find around loose stools and diarrhea predominant conditions, I find them more helpful there. But then you have to follow up with the nutrition that fosters the long-term microbiome, because you don't want to have to be relying on a probiotic for the next 60 years. Instead, you want to use it as a therapeutic tool while you're working on, you want to grow the garden that you want to have long term. You don't want to constantly be like ripping out the flowers and having to replace them.
That's a great metaphor for that. And so this has got to be something, people who are really dealing with IBS and Crohn's, and these are very life-changing things to deal with, conditions to deal with, and they can be really hard on people. So nothing that we're saying can be instituted without talking to your provider, talking to your registered dietitian who's examined you and is looking at what you're eating, because it's very complicated. As you're saying, it's all very complicated. If we are very healthy and we are going through life and we just kind of want to tweak something, this is where the book and this conversation can be much more helpful, I think. Yeah. But such a good thing to talk to your primary care provider about whether there's a way to, because I think sometimes some of our doctors assume we're not going to go to all this trouble, and they want us to have relief. They want us to feel somewhat better.
And I see that all the time. Like, as I've been a dietitian for 15 years, and, things are much, much better now. But when I started 15 years ago, one of the biggest challenges was even having physicians suggest that a dietitian can be helpful. Because the awareness wasn't there that nutrition can be such a powerful tool. But B, for exactly that reason. Well, my patient isn't going to change. My patient just wants a pill, And I think the most powerful way to change our health is not either or. It's not rejecting modern medicine, to only do quote unquote natural things. There's a real sort of fallacy in wellness around that, but it's in taking the best of modern medicine and supporting it with the best of lifestyle. Because if you get the nutrition and the movement and the stress right, maybe you need a lower dose of your medication, or maybe you need a medication for the short term to help you get settled, to take your blood sugars down as you're figuring out nutrition over the next 3, 6, 9 months. But it's important to do both. Listen to your doctor, take their advice, but then also push back on, like, how can I use nutrition? What can I do for stress? Like, what is their role, and how can I be an active participant in my health?
Okay. I'm so glad we talked about that. We haven't talked about that much on this podcast on this issue, and I'm glad I've got the right person. So now let's talk a little bit, before you have to go, a little bit about the more fun book that you wrote just now, Plant Magic, which just got published. When was the publication date?
April 23rd. So she's a newborn in this world.
That's marvelous, Julie. April 23rd. That's a great time to be born. Spring baby. And Plant Magic, we talked about about kind of how that makes us feel, the idea that there's really something in there that's transformative, but also delightful about food. So, and you mentioned hibiscus, which I have to say, I think has been missing from my diet all along. Tell me how to incorporate hibiscus.
Yeah. So if people are saying hibiscus, isn't that a flower? Yes, it is. And it is consumed in many different countries, both as a typical food, but also as like an herbal medicine. A great example is one of my favorite food cities in the entire world, Mexico City. It's not uncommon to go to a restaurant and have hibiscus enchiladas, where these like beautiful hibiscus flowers with they have such an incredible, like astringent and tart and earthy flavor. They're also very high in vitamin C. And so you can get hibiscus in multiple ways. So you can buy just hibiscus teas, like many common national brands will make teas with hibiscus because it has that beautiful magenta color and has a really fruity, sort of sweet tart flavor. But you can also find dried hibiscus so that you can make your own infusions. And I have a hibiscus lemonade in the book, which couldn't be simpler. You're just doing a really simple infusion of dried hibiscus flowers and then adding it as a flavoring to lemonade because it really plays on that sweet tart thing. You can also find, which I just discovered recently, dried hibiscus, which is not dry like a tea, but dried like an apricot for use in food. And so you can add those, you can chop them up. Like if you make little like energy truffles, you could do that. You could add them to cookies and baked goods. You can, again, if you want to do a more traditional sort of Mexican inspired dish, you could try your hand at doing hibiscus in tacos or enchiladas. So it's super fun. And this is what I want people to embrace is that like, let's have fun. Like, let's buy a new ingredient at the farmer's market we've never seen before. And through the magic of the internet, figure out what to do with it on a weekend. Like food has, the ability to nourish our bodies, but food is more than just nutrients, right? Food is connection to our cultural heritage. Food is connection to others. Like what's better than sitting around a table with friends or family over a nice leisurely meal. And food also has the ability to reconnect us with what's real. And I definitely found, since 2020, like, and writing cookbooks in this environment, there were so many days where I just couldn't make heads or tails of anything, but I could cook. If your hands are dirty, you can't be touching your phone. So it's a really beautiful way to get back to this very tactile, real world thing of being in the moment and being present with something that's not like an overwhelming onslaught of digital information.
So hibiscus, I'm writing it down because that's something I want to at least experiment with. And, it was reminding me when you were talking about it, one of the things, one of these kind of mindsets we have about a lot of animal products in our culture is that some of them are very sophisticated and they're delicious, but only in a very rarefied way. And you have foie gras and you have all kinds of cheeses that are done in a way that I found that a little bit missing from my life at first was this idea, well, I'm eating broccoli and I liked the food. It was delicious, but it was kind of missing some of that magic that you're talking about, that kind of wow connection.
I agree. Culturally, we have, and there's been some incredible books on this type of topic. Meat Hooked is one of them, which I just adored. And also No Meat Required by Alicia Kennedy. She is a vegetarian, food and culture writer, and I love her work. And so this idea of status and pleasure and like rarefication that lends itself to things like caviar or like like a very fine aged cheese. And we can actually do that in the plant world. I find that the restaurant like Noma, and they have their book of ferments, these incredible ferments or these beautiful heirloom beans, companies like Rancho Gordo or Primary Beans are doing these gorgeous heirloom beans. And so there are ways of embracing the special because it is special. Like what an incredible gift all of these foods and all of these plants are. And so there are ways to sort of, that you make a little fermented infusion and then that's what you drink. Like there's in the book, there's a blueberry chamomile shrub where you ferment the two of those in apple cider vinegar. And then you've got this gorgeous dark purple, syrup that you can add to sparkling water. And it is those little moments of appreciation and reverence and elevating the plant world that I think I agree is so important. Like I love that.
Yeah, and I think it's been missing from some of the more kind of classic vegetarian and vegan cookbooks, and for some good reason. In terms of, they're not things we're going to do every day, right? They are special occasion sorts of things. And I'm going to ask you, because I know I was looking through the recipes on my Kindle version of your book, because I didn't get a physical copy in time. The breakfast. People always say, I find breakfast simple, but a lot of people say, no, breakfast doesn't look right. What's something that you would recommend people try for breakfast? You mentioned oats before.
Yes. We love oats always, the power food of octogenarians everywhere. And I think one of the reasons why breakfast is so difficult, one, mornings can be incredibly hectic. But then everyone has different taste buds and what they want. Like some people love a smoothie because it's fast. They can make something flavorful. They can, take it in their car if they have to drive to work. And other people say, well, no, I need to chew my breakfast. Like I could never be satisfied, right? So there is something for everyone in terms of the breakfast in Plant Magic, really keeping that in mind. There's a couple of incredibly delicious smoothies, one that is chocolate mint and one that is blackberry basil, sorry. To just really sort of push the flavor profiles and elevate morning smoothies. But there's also a chocolate chip spelt pancake. It's so fun. I have two kids who are my biggest critics. So I'm always trying to find those recipes where they don't give me the side eye, like, oh, is this healthy, Mom? It's just a pancake. It's a wonderful pancake. I also wanted to play with something that was a huge part of my, back pocket recipe survival strategy before I went vegan, which was a frittata. So there is a frittata in there, which makes a great brunch. If you're having people over for Sunday brunch, it's just such a lovely thing to be able to present a frittata with some, nice crusty bread and a fruit salad. So everything sort of runs the gamut. And muffins. There is a tahini caramel apple muffin in the book, which is so incredibly delicious. Like it is nourishing enough for breakfast, but craveable enough that it absolutely feels like dessert too.
That sounds fantastic. So I'm thinking of somebody right now who is going to want to write those down, because she always like, yeah, but breakfast, no, I don't know.
Well, and I think for a lot of us, eggs, eggs are that sort of breakfast. And so I love coming up with recipes that fit that niche. On my blog, I have a chickpea scramble, which takes 5 minutes. And for anyone who's like, oh, how good is a chickpea scramble? Everyone who tries that recipe falls in love with it. And then I also use chickpea flour because I love a breakfast sandwich. My sort of like pinnacle of wonderful breakfasts is a breakfast sandwich. And so I use chickpea flour to create essentially a little egg pancake. And then I layer on the vegan cheese and greens and put it on some spread of grain toast. And that nourishes that craving so well.
I miss a sandwich like that when I'm on the road early in the morning. That's when the rest of the time I don't care. But when I'm like in an early like road trip or something like that, or getting to an airplane, that's when I go, oh, that would be so good.
I know, so many years I will go to, a coffee shop and just look at those breakfast sandwiches. Like, how difficult is it for someone to, put a little just egg and a little Beyond Patty in there? And I'm so lucky that in my neighborhood, like 6 blocks from my house, we now have a fully vegan bakery called To Live For. And Erin put a breakfast sandwich, and that's my weekend. I get my vegan breakfast sandwich and I take my kid to soccer and like eat that breakfast sandwich, an absolute delight.
I know. I think that's a bunch of places are missing. You can keep both of those in your freezer. Nobody has to have anything special on hand at the local coffee shop. You can have the just egg in the freezer. You can have the vegan sausage. It's not what we would recommend for people to eat 3 times a day, but but we don't want them to be eating any kind of fast food type of sandwich 3 times a day. I don't know why they don't do it more.
I know.
We have so much wisdom to share, Desiree. So And so let's talk about something else in Plant Magic that we want to draw everybody's attention to so that they will go out. We can't pre-order it anymore because it is actually in the world, but they can get out there and order it. And we're going to give away Veg Your Best. We'll pay for three copies to go out to some of our listeners. And we want to make sure that I like to do that with most of our cookbook authors because I think your recipes often get a little bit stolen from. They get borrowed and shared, and it'd be nice to just support what you do. Tell me a little bit something in the evening that we would want to eat that Plant Magic has for us.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for that. So, my recommendations are really, I almost feel like a recipe concierge. So it depends on what you're after. For the tempeh skeptic or the family that also gives the side eye to quote unquote healthy meals, my tempeh nachos are incredible. They're just crumbled up tempeh in really well sauced and spiced because I love nachos. And so this sort of typifies my philosophy around nutrition in a couple of ways. One, eat more plants, but two, what can you add to your favorite meals so you are better nourished and feel more full and satisfied? So this is a typical, we're not talking potatoes, we're not talking vegetables. This is actual tortilla chips with a beautifully sauced and spiced, red pepper and tempeh mixture, and then vegan cheese on the top. So that's a fantastic one for health food skeptics or plant skeptics in general. One of the ones that is nearest and dearest to my heart is the gigante beans. And that's because I have been very much known to open a can of gigante beans, which are a large white bean typical to Greek cuisine in a really lovely, jammy, savory tomato sauce. So I just open up one of those cans as a snack and eat them right out of the can. And so I was like, okay, I can do this. I can make this at home. So it's a beautiful oven baked, everything goes in the pot and then it's completely hands off. And you just let it simmer on a Sunday. And it's so flavorful, but so simple. And that with some crusty bread and maybe a salad on the side will show you just how comforting and flavorful and fun fully plant-based eating can be.
That's going on the plan this week because I actually have some nice imported Greek heirloom gigante beans in the pantry. They're just sitting there staring at me, waiting for you to remind me.
Oh, that's perfect.
To make it. So that's going to be that, and I'll try to remember to post that on Instagram because that would be great. So that sounds fantastic. Desiree, tell me a little bit about your podcast and about are you still creating the TV show? Is that still on?
The TV show was this beautiful one-hit wonder of a moment. So it is available so it's on Gusto TV, which I know if you have a Roku and some of those other devices, you can still actually watch my show, the reruns of my show. The podcast is where I'm at now. It's called the Allsorts Podcast. It comes to a new episode every 2 weeks. And my goal there is, as it is always, it's just, I say we're here to make wellness not suck. The idea that wellness should feel really good. So it is positive, evidence-based, and actually practical and useful information in all facets of wellness. So, I've actually got a menopause and perimenopause episode, a couple of those coming up. We talk about everything from, protein to the science of soy to, how climate change impacts our wellness. So we talk about, I called it Allsorts, one, because in Canada, we have these candies called Allsorts, which are licorice, which I loved before I went vegan, but also because we talk about all sorts of things.
That's great. I'm going to put links to the show, Allsorts Podcast. Desiree Nielsen, thank you so much. I don't want to keep you too long, but I hope that you'll come back on again when we have another topic that we'd like to discuss with a registered dietitian and get your personal, just really erudite discussion about.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I would be so delighted to come back.
So, what did you think about Desiree? Desiree Nielsen, I always say that someday I'll meet an inarticulate Canadian, but so far that has not happened. Desiree Nielsen was a great guest, don't you think? And you should listen to her podcast, Allsorts. And you should follow her on Instagram at Desiree Nielsen RD. And if you would like a copy of her book, Plant Magic, the first 3 people to message me on my Instagram, that's Veg Your Best, or to email me, the links of all this is always in the show notes. The first 3 people to ask will get a copy from me of Plant Magic. Okay, kids, it's great for me to be back up in New England, though I really do miss my Florida-based kids and grandchildren. And yes, you granddogs, I miss you too. There's probably a lot coming and going in your homes and your families right now too. So if there's anything I can do to help you with that, book a call, free call. We can talk, we can email on Voxer, we can strategize. You decide, but you'll walk away with a fresh perspective. That's what usually happens. Sometimes you walk away with a whole new plan, but either way, that's coaching, and I think everyone can benefit from coaching now and then. But in the meantime, veg your best. Veg Your Best podcast production, music, and editing by Charlie Weinshank. Thanks, Charlie. Before you go, it would mean so much to me and the Veg Your Best team if you would hit subscribe, leave us a 5-star review, or share with someone you think might be interested. Something about algorithms, it helps bump us up a little in the rankings, and that's the best way to help others find the podcast and for us to find our audience. So, until next week, make it easy and veg your best.